up at first and see, is there anything in this subject that has stood out to you or that you remember and will stick with you for a long time from some of the past topics we've talked about? Parenting. Nothing. Good communication, yes, communication, that's right. Yeah, we talked about being one who knows their wife as a husband. You know your wife, so in order to know how she is an efficient worker around the home, an excellent worker, remember the word excellent meant the same idea as a strong military. So one that's efficient, that has all of its logistics in place, that has enough procurement to be able to go to war and all of that. You know what she's procured, you know how she has worked efficiently with her time management, how she saves things on Facebook Marketplace and all of that. You know that about your wife. So that means that you observe her and you see her and you acknowledge her. You bless and praise her before the children. Proverbs 31. So that's a great point. Remember, the Bible does not use the term kids to refer to children. Kids is a goat. Children refers to the relationship that you'll always have. So you're always a child, even though you may be married. And we saw that in the context of Proverbs, that children were referred to, but they were already married. And so that relationship to mom and dad is there forever, even though in a one-flesh union, it may be a little different. You still need to honor and respect your parents. So remember that. Just because you move out of the house or are independent in your finances doesn't mean you don't take the wisdom and advice from mom and dad. So that's a big point as well. Well, let's go into our topic of finances. Today, the way this is going to be broken down is we're going to talk about work ethic and how work ethic relates to reward. And also we're going to talk about wealth and poverty. Those are the two main areas in the book of Proverbs. Work ethic related to reward, and also wealth and poverty. First, we see work ethic and wealth. They're both, but work ethic right now is correlated to character. Correlated to character. The main emphasis and thrust of Proverbs is that God's will for us is to work excellently and righteously to provide for our needs. God will supply us with our needs through an excellent and righteous work ethic. And much of what we'll see today is illustrated by what example in the natural world? The ant and the sluggard. Right? The ant and the sluggard. So that's what we're going to see contrasted here today. So let's go ahead and start looking. We have a chart up here. We're going to look at the contrast between the ant and the sluggard, and also the sluggard and the righteous. There's more, but this is just a simple survey that I was able to take apart. I'm sure you'd be able to grab maybe some more insights from the rest of the Bible, but also possibly from the book of Proverbs. But the first thing I want us to see is the illustration of the ant and the sluggard in Proverbs chapter 6. Let's look there. We're going to read the counsel, parental counsel to the son, and you go to verse 6 in Proverbs chapter 6, and it says, "Go to the ant, O sluggard, observe her ways and be wise, which, having no chief officer or ruler, prepares her food in the summer and gathers her provision in the harvest. How long will you lie down, O sluggard? When will you arise from your sleep? A little sleep, a little slumber, a little folding of the hands to rest. And your poverty will come in like a vagabond, and your need like an armed man." So, the next verse, it actually talks about this person being a wicked, worthless person. It's very clear in the Bible that ants were wise. Ants were wise. It says, observe, in verse 6 of Proverbs 6, observe her ways and be wise. Be wise. It actually says in chapter 30, verse 24 through 25, they're excellent in their wisdom. Really, they are skilled, wise workers. The idea is that they're exceedingly wise. They have a skill about them that shows they're experienced, and that they know what they're doing with their time. So their way is wise, they're skilled in wisdom, yet the sluggard, if you compare this to chapter 15, verse 9, you see here, their way is tough. Proverbs 15 talks about the way of a sluggard, a lazy one, which is literally the translation, being tough. Being tough. The way of the wicked is an abomination to the Lord, but he who loves him pursues righteousness. The way of the wicked is an abomination to the Lord. It's a tough situation to go with the way of the wicked and one who is impoverished. I think that verse is actually misaligned. I need to recorrect that. I'm looking for the one that talks about them having thick terrain that they need to walk through. Sorry about that. But the contrast I want you to have here is that the ant is wise because they don't need to be told in order to obey. So Proverbs 6 verse 7 says, which having no chief officer or ruler prepares food in the summer. So if you're out there and you're expecting to work hard, you don't always need to be told to get out of your bed and go work or go be efficient or go do a task or go and honor the Lord. And if you're a son, or if you're a child, or if you're even an adult, and you constantly need to be told to get up and go work, then you're proving yourself to be a sluggard, a lazy one, which is literally the interpretation of the word in Hebrew. But a wise one is one who doesn't need to be told to go to work. An ant would be like one who wakes up and finds ways to help in work, or finds ways to get themselves trained excellently in order to be wise in their work. Another thing that we see about the ant in chapter 6 of Proverbs is verse 8. They work hard. They work hard, whereas the sluggard, all through the book of Proverbs, is referred to as sleeping too much in chapter 6, verse 9, as being inactive in chapter 20, verse 4. I said inactive, that's the word. And also making excuses in chapter 22, verse 13. Let's look at those verses real quick. The ant is a hard worker. Oh, sorry, the verse before, by the way, Proverbs 15, verse 19. The way of the lazy is as a hedge of thorns, but the path of the upright is a highway. So a person who's lazy will have many things get in the way from their own detriment. So, the ant, back to the ant working hard versus the lazy one having all of these excuses. Look at Proverbs chapter 6, verse 8. Prepares her food in the summer and gathers her provision in the harvest. They work when they're supposed to work. So, when you have a work schedule, you're working, you're not being lazy. But look at that in contrast to the inactive position of the sluggard in chapter 20. Chapter 20, verse 4, it says here, the sluggard does not plow after the autumn, so he begs during the harvest and has nothing. That's really interesting. They don't work when there is a reward to even be gathered. That's what the harvest is. This is the time for the harvest, so he doesn't work when it's time to be active. He's inactive at the wrong time. We're to rest. It says about that. It says that in the Bible. The Lord rested on the seventh day. And we are to have moments of rest, but there is also times for work. And the illustration we get from the ant is they work when they're supposed to. They work hard. The sluggard does not work when others are working. We see also they make excuses. Look at Proverbs chapter 22, verse 13. They make excuses. This is really true of today, if you think about it. Proverbs 22, verse 13, the sluggard says, there is a lion outside, I'll be killed in the streets. Why does he say there's a lion outside? He doesn't want to work. What would be an example of that kind of illustration today? What examples have you heard of people making excuses about that don't want to work? Yeah, good.
It's too hard.
It's too hard. Yep. What else? Too hot. It's toxic. Yeah, what else? Too sick? Okay, yeah. Using a physical ailment to avoid your responsibilities to provide. It's not what I want to do. That's a big one nowadays, right? Everybody wants to be their own boss. Yeah, nobody cares about me is another one. You know, what's interesting is that I watch some of the men out there that give biblical counsel to finances. I'm sure most of us do. And one of the things that they refer to a lot is the generation that's before us has accumulated a small amount of wealth, right? And what was the secret to your accumulation of a small amount of wealth? Working hard over a long period of time, right? Saving a little bit, working hard over a long period of time. The current generation wants wealth immediately, and they don't want to work hard for it. They don't want to sometimes have maybe 2 jobs, or they don't want to sometimes go out when it's difficult. Like, I was thinking about the landscapers here in Arizona, how hard-working they are. A guy knocked on our door a couple days ago and said, "I'm looking for work. I'll trim your tree right now." And he'd do it for a really good price. And I was thinking, I just really respected that guy. He had an opening in the afternoon, and he went knocking on doors. I mean, you know, that's a work ethic that we don't see often. But if you're going to be somebody who is blessed, you can't be making excuses no matter what they are. Oftentimes, people reach God-blessed wealth through hard work over a long period of time. But the lazy one is inactive. And so what does he do? During the harvest, when others have plenty in their storehouses, they beg because he has nothing. That's what Proverbs 20, verse 4 says. We have to be careful about beggars. Sometimes people who are impoverished is because they are not hard workers. They're inactive. And you can always test this in your heart. It says elsewhere, we'll look at a verse in a minute, you know, who gives to the poor graciously. That's something we're called to do. But those who are impoverished because they are not good workers, that is the result of their folly. That is a biblical position. So let's continue moving on here. They sleep too much. They're inactive. They make excuses. Look at another thing here that we see. Laziness also burns bridges in relationships. Proverbs 10, verse 26. Look here with us. Like vinegar to the teeth and smoke to the eyes, so is the lazy one to those who send him. Lazy one there, same word for sluggard. What does it mean being vinegar and being smoke? To the eyes, vinegar. To the teeth? Yeah, painful, bitter, right? Smoke to the eyes, it burns, doesn't it? You sit before a fire and the fumes come up, it burns you. Now it says here, so is the lazy one to those who send him. Imagine being a parent, sending out a child to a friend's office. Trust me, my son's going to do a good job for you. And the son is lazy. I mean, it can burn the relationship between that friend and the businessman, right? Because of the lazy one. That's just one illustration, but that happens often. Sometimes I was talking to a really successful, God-honoring businessman in the church 2 months ago, and he said, you know, sometimes I walk into the church and I feel like I'm just dealing with a bunch of lazy ones where they couldn't get it right anywhere else, and they come to the church for handouts. And, you know, he accumulated wealth through hard work. But when lazy ones come around, they can be detrimental to relationships, and they can always want handouts. Make sure that you're not needy because you're lazy or neglecting your duty as a Christian. Also, look here. In contrast to those who excellently work and are satisfied, in chapter 13, verse 4, we see that the lazy one lusts and gets nothing. Look at chapter 13, verse 4. They lust and get nothing. It says here, the soul of the sluggard craves and gets nothing, but the soul of the diligent is made fat. The soul is the nephesh. The soul is that immaterial internal being of each of us. And only God knows what's inside of us, but we see at times our internal immaterial being coming out through the flesh. And the flesh here is that of craving, of lust. It's actually a participle, which means that this person constantly craves for something that they didn't work for. But look at the difference between the craving and the one who is satisfied is diligent. Did you know here that craves is a verb and diligence is a noun? So the action of the lazy one, the sluggard, is a constant craving and lust after something they didn't work for, but the character of the one who is diligent is someone who's described as persevering to finish tasks. They're an excellent workmanship. I mean, we look at this right here, and I think of this pulpit built by R.C., and I think of one who was diligent. You know, he didn't cut corners. Some people talk about sanding the inside of the drawers. You've heard of that expression before? Nobody's going to see the inside of the drawers, right? That's an excellent worker. He's diligent to finish the task, but the sluggard, their internal immaterial being is craving something that they've never worked for, and they only want what they can see, while the diligent person works for what others cannot see. So we got to make sure that our lusts are after the right thing, excellence, and not just expectations of getting things. That word crave, by the way, it's the same word that's used in Deuteronomy 5:21 for desiring and craving another man's wife. So it's the same realm of lust. We want to make sure that that is not us, that we are excellent and satisfied because of the character behind our work ethic and not because of the possessions that we're after. Also, look here, we see that in contrast to one who is totally satisfied in chapter 13, verse 4, the sluggard is one who is anxious, he's too sleepy to even eat, and he's proud. So satisfaction versus anxiety versus sleep deprived and versus pride. Look at the anxiousness of the sluggard in chapter 26, verse 14. 26 verse 14 says, as the door turns on its hinges, so does the sluggard on his bed. He's tossing and turning all night long. And why would that be? Somebody who's lazy, who's a sluggard, tossing and turning all night long. Yeah, conscience and what? Yeah, conviction. His affairs are out of line. We'll see in a little bit that his house may be overgrown. It's unkept. His finances are out of control. I mean, he can't sleep. The Lord's put it on the heart that he struggles in sleep. He's anxious. Not only that, the very next verse talks about the sluggard buries his hand in the dish. He is weary of bringing it to his mouth again. Actually, later on in 26 verse 15, it explains it right there, but in 19:24 it has the same exact expression, but doesn't talk about the weary part. And in 26:15 it tells us that he can't even bring his food to his mouth because he's too tired. But it's not too tired from working hard, it's too tired from anxiety. That's a difference. You see, some people, they walk around and they're just always tired. If you're not right internally, the Lord will manifest things externally in you. And that's one of those things as a counselor you want to look at when you're counseling people with the Word of God. Is somebody depressed because they're just not a good worker? I mean, think about that. How many people get called out for being lazy And that was the root issue of their depression. I think that's a lot of people in today's society, right? It's so nice when you see somebody who sleeps well because they had a good day's of work. It's often told that if you struggle with sleep, go out and run a couple miles. Or make sure you complete a checklist that you need to do that will give you a sense of accomplishment. God has set up a work and reward system for all of us. And that's why even for those who are working at home, that is a wonderful place to work. It's not what some may think as being without purpose. It is an incredible purpose, and the goals that are achieved there provide good sleep as well and provide a life without anxiety. Make sure that you feel appreciated and that you appreciate what God has given you in the work at home as well. The other thing about this concept of being too sleepy to eat is look at their action here. Look at their action. He buries his hand in the dish. Proverbs 19:24, also in 26:15. He buries it in the dish. It literally can be seen as his hand is hidden underneath the food. And so what's interesting here is he dives in to eat. And it shows the animalistic nature of this person to jump in before they're even able to finish a task. They jump in without being able to complete things, including something as simple as a daily provision like eating. He can't finish the task because of his anxiety that has brought weariness to his life. All that's sad. We don't want to end up in that state. But also we see here in the Bible as well their pride in 26, verse 16. The sluggard is wiser in his own eyes than 7 men who can give a discreet answer. 7 is the word for complete. That would be the idea of somebody that went out and got a complete sense of counsel. 7 men should be more than enough to understand what you should do in a matter. But this lazy one sees himself as wiser in his own eyes than getting complete counsel. He is proud. So make sure in your working that you do seek counsel for some of the activities of your work. 7 men would be the Hebrew idea of a complete set of counsel. Don't be wiser in your own eyes. Okay, 25 through 26 talks a little bit also about their contrast between righteousness. A sluggard is selfish and always wants, yet a righteous person is selfless and gives. Actually, the technical term they use here is the idea of handout. Look at Proverbs 21, verse 25 through 26. The desire of the sluggard puts him to death, for his hands refuse to work. All day long he is craving, while the righteous gives and does not hold back. Now, the idea of hold back here is contrasted with the idea of hands. Look what the sluggard does. The sluggard, hands refuse to work. It says in the New Testament that a man who we should work, diligently with our hands. That's in Thessalonians. So he doesn't want to use his hands to help himself. Yet look at the righteous one. He wants to give handouts from his work. Hold back does not hold back, for the righteous one literally means that he has a loose grip and he extends his hands out for other people. It's the difference between being lazy and wanting handouts versus being hardworking and giving handouts. Isn't it better to give than to receive? Sometimes things are just that simple, and it's great to give when you can give off the back of hard work. something to be said about that. We're in a society where much of what we do for our work is not necessarily seen as working with our hands, but you do work with your hands, whether it's on a computer or whether it's with your mind. You are working in that sense that he's talking about here. It's something that brings the idea of exertion. The hands was seen as the work ethic of the Hebrew for the total body being involved in the work, because it was the forward part of your body. So everything in your being is behind your work. The hands was just the front part of it, and everything behind it is coming through that work. Make sure that you're working to the point of exertion and not holding back what the Lord gives you from that work in reward. You want to be somebody who's righteous and freely gives. Well, it says in Proverbs 22, verse 9, just that. He who is generous will be blessed, for he gives some of his food to the poor. I've seen some people in impoverished situations give everything they have. And that's not necessarily a biblical mandate. The mandate is that you give some. You give a portion of what you have from your hard work. Well, one thing here as well that we'll see between the ant and the sluggard is that the ant in their home life looks careless. They're careless around the home. Yet, the righteous one takes care of the home. Look here at Proverbs 24, verse 32. You see here, it says, "When I saw, I reflected upon it, I looked and received instruction." Now, what he's talking about here is, let's go back one verse, or two verses. Verse 30, Proverbs 24, verse 30. "I passed by the field of the sluggard, by the vineyard of the man lacking sense." Let me translate that for you in the Hebrew, void of understanding. Literally, the sluggard was one that is void of understanding. "And behold, it was completely overgrown with thistles." These are literally thorns. "And its surface was covered with nettles." Nettles, these are weeds and ivy. "Its surface was covered with nettles, and its stone wall was broken down. When I saw, I reflected upon it. I looked and received instruction." And then it says, the sluggard says, "A little sleep, a little slumber, a little folding of the hands to rest. Then your poverty will come as a robber." Look here. They are impoverished from this situation. They're careless around the home. Now, the sad thing here is that they don't take care of even their own house and what the Lord has provided them. In Proverbs 27, we see totally a different situation going on. Proverbs 27, verse 23, we see a righteous person taking care of their flock. "Know well the condition of your flocks and pay attention to your herds. For riches are not forever, nor does a crown endure all generations." We see here the purpose of it all the way through Proverbs is that you take care of what the Lord has entrusted to you. I was told of several months ago that a man was disqualified from ministry. This is a true story, because the house that he was renting was in shambles, and the person that rented the house to him ended up calling the church and saying, "I can't believe this guy's a pastor." Because the house they rented to him was overgrown, had insects everywhere. It was not well kept. They were not a good renter. And you think about that with your own life. There are seasons. I've had moments where the weeds were a little out of control and I needed to set aside things and take care of it. But God wants you to take care of what He has entrusted to you around the home. So if you're working hard at work but neglecting the home, that's not a hard work ethic as well. There needs to be balance. There needs to be time set aside to take care of the home. Someone who's lazy doesn't take care of the home. All the way from the garden to the living room and to the flock as well. Well, that's the ant versus the sluggard. Any observations, thoughts, or other things that you would like to bring up? Yeah, go ahead.
If you work hard, you'll make enough money to provide for your family.
Yeah, if you work hard, God does promise you'll make enough money to provide for your family and your needs. Yeah, it may be a different idea of what we have, but God will certainly provide, because he even provides for who? Everybody. What's that? Heard somebody say it. The sparrows. Yes. He will provide for us. Something that's so small as a sparrow, he'll provide for us. Okay, well, let's now go into wealth and poverty and look what the Lord has to teach us there in his instructional will through the lens of Solomon. We see here that wealth and poverty are always talked about in relation to character as well. In Proverbs, it's interesting. There are those who are rich and wicked. There are those who are poor and wicked. There are those who are poor and righteous, and there are those who are rich and righteous. It's not about the state of your possessions as much as it is the status of your heart. No matter whether we are rich or poor, we are to pursue righteous character. Proverbs compels us to use our wealth generously for God's kingdom and be found righteous no matter how much we have. So let's look at wealth and poverty, both the blessings, consequences, and character of those in the book of Proverbs. First, we see that in wealth, we are to honor the Lord with the best of your possessions. Proverbs 3, verse 9. Look at Proverbs 3. And you see here, it talks specifically about this. Honor the Lord with the best of your possessions. Honor the Lord from your wealth and from the first of all your produce. That's the idea of the best. The idea of the ripest harvest. You take it in the beginning and give it to the Lord. That's why some people, automatically withdraw, to give to the church. And they do it in the beginning. Some people take this literally all over the Bible to go to different lengths, but the idea is that you want to honor the Lord from your wealth. Be a generous giver with the best of what you have. Remember, in the Old Testament, when the Jews did not give the best to sacrifice, it wasn't good enough for the Lord. So the Lord requires the best. We also see here that wisdom, riches, and honor are all to be accompanied with wealth. Wisdom, riches, and honor accompany wealth for those who are doing it right. We see in Proverbs 8:14 it says, 8:14 it says, counsel is mine and sound wisdom I am understanding, power is mine. This is Solomon, who experienced God's blessing of wisdom and wealth. And he says here in verse 18 of Proverbs 8, riches and honor are with me, enduring wealth and righteousness. In his life, he experienced this sense of rich honor with wealth. And although we're not promised to have any life in any way, shape, or form like Solomon's wealth, he did see a life that for a period of time was rich and honorable to the Lord. And remember, at one point in his life, he didn't. He didn't honor the Lord with his riches. So we see this constant contrast that there is a talk about wealth that is honorable and wealth that is dishonorable. Solomon experienced both of that. We should look at his life that was honorable when he was seeking the Lord for counsel, when he was honoring him, when he wasn't going and trying to create relationships with foreign women to gain a bigger empire. We definitely would not pursue those things in our life if we are trying to honor the Lord with our wealth. Well, it also says in Proverbs chapter 10, verse 15, both the rich and the poor are defenseless without the Lord as their foundation. Both are defenseless. So whether you're poor or whether you're rich, no matter what you have, if the Lord is not your foundation, you're without defense. Look at Proverbs 10, verse 15. It says this, the rich man's wealth is his fortress. The ruin of the poor is their poverty. The interesting thing about this here is that both are in bad situations. Who should the fortress be in for the rich man? Yeah, look at Proverbs chapter 10. We see here in Proverbs that God wants us to build our foundation upon the fear of the Lord, not upon our own fortress that we can build with our own wealth. One who is sustained from their own possessions is without defense. And a good example of that is actually northern Israel in the divided monarchy. Did you know that northern Israel had great fortresses, yet other nations were able to take them down because they did not build their defense upon the Lord. They built it upon their own lust. And we see that all throughout the Bible. God tears down the nation of Israel when they lack faith and trust in the Lord. Look at David. His faith was built upon Yahweh, and he had a simple sling and a stone and knocked down the Goliath and the Ninevites. Yet, parts of history of Israel had great temples, great palaces, storehouses full of wealth, and they were knocked down simply by foreign nations. Make sure your foundation is built there. Also, the ruin of the poverty from their laziness is going to continue their status. They won't have a defense either because their character has been proven by their laziness. So we see that wealth and poverty isn't the point. The point is foundation upon the Lord. Another thing that's brought out about wealth and poverty in the book of Proverbs is that we're not to lie about our situation. We're not to lie about having wealth. We're not to lie about having poverty. If you're a wealthy person, you're not to go around gloating, but you're also not to be lying and purposely covering up what you have, when what you have can bless and honor the Lord. And if you're poor, you're not to go around dressing like you're rich. You know, in our day and age, they talk about fake it till you make it. Well, that's not biblical. Look at Proverbs chapter 13, verse 7. There is one who pretends to be rich but has nothing. Another pretends to be poor but has great wealth. This is the idea of being pretentious. The idea of literally pretending you're poor when you have a lot. And why would somebody do that? What's that? You get more, possibly, yeah. What else could be a reason, a heart motive? What? You don't have to be generous, yes. Possibly less people will come after you for handouts, which does happen sometimes. But this person is embarrassed by what the Lord has given them. You know, if the Lord has blessed you, you don't need to be embarrassed. You need to bless others, and you need to be honoring the Lord with your riches. I've seen men use their estates, use their possessions, use their property, use their money in a God-honoring way, and then others cover it up as if they're ashamed or greedy to hold on to it and not want to help out those who are in need. Here it also says the same thing about the poor, right? You know, if you have nothing, don't act like you're rich. We got to make sure that we're honest about our possessions. Don't go around living a lie. Don't be pretentious about what you have. That's the idea here. Well, we see another expression as well in Proverbs 13, verse 8. We talked about this a little earlier, but the ransom of a man's life is his wealth, but the poor hears no rebuke. We see here that wealth can actually bring a righteous person out of a bad situation because of their hard work. They've worked excellently. Their character is righteous, and that does bring them into a spiritual state that is not poor and not lacking. Yet a lazy person, according to Proverbs chapter 13, verse 8, does not hear rebuke. Their laziness keeps them in a poor spiritual state because they don't take reproof. They don't correct themselves. One of the beautiful things about this is that if you are lazy and you do take rebuke, you can improve your spiritual impoverishment. God will lift you up through reproof, through rebuke internally. You won't be spiritually poor. Now, we don't know necessarily what the Lord has for your blessing of a physical matter, but we do know the Lord will provide for your needs. But you are promised to have spiritual impoverishment if you don't take reproof. Make sure that you listen to reproof and that you are spiritually wealthy. All right, chapter 13, verse 11 shows us in wealth that it's to be obtained by hard work. It says here in Proverbs chapter 13, verse 11, wealth is to be obtained by hard work. Wealth obtained by fraud dwindles, but the one who gathers by labor increases it. Somebody who gains by frauding others will not last. And we see this all the time with those who are caught in Ponzi schemes, right? They're founded out. Ultimately, you'll be founded out by the Lord regardless. But one who gathers by labor, hard work over a long period of time, slowly increases. Do you know the secret to the stock market? My undergraduate is in finance, and I remember we were in derivatives finance class in my senior year, and we asked the professor, how do we get rich through the stock market? Like, what's the secret to getting rich on short-term trading? And you know what he said? If I knew the answer, I wouldn't be in this class. But put your money in the stock market or put your money in investments and keep it there for a long time, right? Deferred appreciation. You will keep it there for a long time, work hard over a long time, and it will increase over a long time. All those who gain by labor will increase it. We're not trying to get rich quick by frauding others. That is not a way to be wealthy, and in that case, wealth is a bad thing. We also see that wealth obtained sinfully will eventually be inherited by those who are righteous. God will reverse it. And this could be true in a eschatological sense by Israel, for fact. Because if you think about it, all the foreign nations, it literally says in the book of Zechariah that their possessions will be handed over to Israel. So it's very interesting. We may wait for a long time to see this actually come true. But in Proverbs chapter 13, verse 22, it brings that notion up as well. A good man leaves an inheritance to his children's children, and wealth of the sinner is stored up for the righteous. For the Jewish audience, this definitely will take place in the millennial reign. It'll all be reversed. Everyone who plundered them, who took from them, will return it to them. And we see this in Zechariah chapter 14. That's a beautiful concept as well. Well, Proverbs chapter 15, verse 6 also brings up something very important. It says, great wealth is in the house of the righteous, but trouble is in the income of the wicked. What do we see here? We see the fact that righteousness is linked to wealth without trouble. If you work hard and you obtain wealth in a righteous fashion, you're not troubled in heart about how much you make. But somebody who gains wealth by trouble will be founded as having an anxious, troubled life in their heart. Their income will give them a conscience that will bring trouble. You don't want to be somebody who's anxious all the time because the way you gained your money was wicked. Another thing we see here about righteously obtaining wealth is that if you obtain wealth righteously, it will lead to an increased assurance and security in the name of the Lord. But if you obtain it in a wicked sense, it will lead to false security and security in your own self. And this is the verse that we talked about a little bit before, a similar notion before. But Proverbs 18:10 through 11 says, "The name of the Lord is a strong tower. The righteous runs into it and is safe. A rich man's wealth is his strong city, and like a high wall in his own imagination." So the man who is righteous runs to the Lord, the name of the Lord, and the man who is rich ends up running to his own security. That's the main trouble of wealth in the New Testament that's brought out. That wealth can hurt your faith in God. Wealth can have you have faith in what you possess and lose faith in what God can only secure, which is your spiritual safety. Make sure that wealth doesn't lead you to be falsely assured in your own security, but be secured in the name of the Lord. If wealth gives you a false sense of security, then you need to be careful. Perhaps you need to give more. Perhaps you need to be dealing with your heart. It's interesting here. This is kind of a neutral concept about wealth, but it actually talks about wealth being good and poverty being a bad sign, but not because poverty was obtained through hard work. Poverty is obtained through laziness. So we see in Proverbs 19, verse 4, it brings up this idea that wealth adds many friends, but a poor man is separated from his friend. So let me explain this for a second. In this context, poverty is seen as a negative. Poverty is seen as a negative because of the neediness of a lazy person. A lazy person is separated from his friends. They're impoverished because they're not doing everything necessary to improve their state through hard work. The word here for separated literally is deserted by their friends. Their friends flee them because they always need handouts. They're a burden to the friendship. Now, this isn't somebody who works hard and is truly in a state of poverty. This is somebody who is always needing handouts because they are lazy. Yet wealth adds many friends. Here, the addition of friends to the wealthy is seen as a positive. It's seen as a positive because you gain friendships. So let's make sure that our laziness doesn't lead to friends deserting us due to the fact that we're a burden to them. Let's look also at, for time's sake, we'll jump down to God blessing faithful gains, but punishing unfaithful gains. Look at Proverbs chapter 28, verse 20 through 21. We see here in verse 20, "A faithful man will abound with blessings, but he who makes haste to be rich will not go unpunished. To show partiality is not good, because for a piece of bread a man will transgress." Think about that. Even a poor person who needs bread for their daily provision will sin in order to get it. But a faithful man will abound with many blessings. Those blessings could be physical, they could be spiritual, but the goal is to be faithful. Be blessed by faithfulness. That's the goal. Well, let's look at another one. From chapter 28, we see the difference between giving generously with our wealth. If you do have wealth and you obtained it righteously, you are to give generously. Proverbs 28, verse 27 tells us this. "When the wicked rise, men hide themselves, but they will perish. The righteous increase." But when they perish, the righteous increase. Sorry, verse 27 is where I wanted to start. "He who gives to the poor will never want, but he who shuts his eyes will have many curses." That's really neat. He who gives to the poor will never want. This is somebody who gives a portion of what they have to those who are in need, not those who are in need that are lazy, but those who are in need because they're generally in a situation, they're in a tough spot. But he who shuts his eyes will have many curses, literally hides his eyes from those who have needs. This is a person who has the ability to give those who are in a tough position something and yet does not. They will face many curses. So getting many blessings versus many curses. Which side do we want to be on? As a righteous person, we want to give. We don't want to shut our eyes to those who are in a tough situation. If there's any doubt, always give. It's always better to give than to receive. Okay, Proverbs 22 tells us that even in wealth, we're to desire the reputation of righteousness, not wealth or riches. So we desire reputation over riches. Oops. Reputation over riches. Sorry, it's cut off from the screen here, but it's on mine. Proverbs 22 verse 1 tells us this. If you look here, we see a good name is to be more desired than great riches. Favor is better than silver and gold. A good name. That's your reputation. That's having honor to your name. When you go out and you represent your namesake, you are to be one who has a good reputation. So your wealth is not to get in the way of your reputation. Your riches is not to get in the way of your reputation. I've said many times that if I could make more money but ruin my name, then that would be something that I would choose not to do. And I hope that all of us would say that as well. Sometimes it's better to just be not having as much possessions, yet keeping our character with good reputation in our city and where we live. So, don't let wealth compromise your character. That's all over the Bible. Look at Proverbs 23, verse 1 through 3. Wealth cannot compromise your character. This is a great example of what we see in the book of Daniel as well. When you sit down to dine with a ruler, consider carefully what is before you, and put a knife to your throat if you are a man of great appetite. Do not desire his delicacies, for it is deceptive food. Deceptive food, what is that? It's something that whets your appetite but will compromise your character. Daniel, he literally did this in Daniel chapter 1, verse 8. It says that he made up his mind that he would not defile himself with the king's choice food or with the wine which he drank. So he sought permission from the commander of the officials that he might not defile himself. He didn't eat the king's food because he knew it would make him compromise. Sometimes when we're around those who are wicked, they will want us to compromise, and they'll do it by giving us something that seems shiny or something that seems tasty. Don't let your appetite get in the way of your character. Pursue godliness. Don't let wealth compromise your character. Well, one more thing before we end this time here. A warning on debt and interest. A warning on debt and interest. We want to take a look at what the Bible says about debt and says about interest. The first thing it says about debt and interest is Proverbs 11:15. We've seen this before. It comes right after the verse about gaining wise counsel. Look at Proverbs 11:14 through 15. It says here, "Where there is no guidance, the people fall, but in abundance of counselors there is victory." And then right after it talks about debt and insurance and interest. "He who is surety for a stranger will surely suffer for it, but he who hates going surety is safe." The idea of going surety is that you have a friend who has engaged in bad business practices. And so to bail them out, you have them step away from the creditor. Surety is the idea of a handshake. And you handshake with the creditor 100% of their debt. So now the creditor is looking at you to cover 100% of their bad business issue and practice. So you're letting friendship get in the way of standing before or standing on behalf of somebody to cover their bad debts. We're not to do that. Debt that has been obtained through folly, you are not to take 100% responsibility for somebody else. They are to learn from their mistake and work hard to get out of their situation. If you take 100% of their folly, then you are now 100% on the line. You're not to suffer the grip of creditors for the sake of another person's foolishness. Now, also, you're not to gain greedily through taking advantage of other people in interest. Look at Proverbs 28, verse 8. This will be our last point. Proverbs 28, verse 8 tells us this. He who increases his wealth by interest and usury gathers it for him who is gracious to the poor. What's unique here is that we see here that interest and usury were actually spoken and rebuked against in Leviticus 25. Usury is the idea of taking advantage of somebody through obsessive amounts of profit and interest. So, I would say this, that if you work for a credit company and you are a part of the decisions that go behind massive, enormous interest rates on people, you are taking advantage of them. This was seen actually in the New Testament, in John chapter 2, at the money changers. What did they do? That was the first money exchange place that we have in the New Testament. It actually was an exchange rate, but the exchange rate, when people would come to the temple to buy things that they could sacrifice, it was too much for them sometimes to travel with what they would sacrifice, so they would go to the temple and buy something to sacrifice, and yet they turned these sacrifices into a way to make an enormous profit that was taking advantage of people pilgrimaging to Jerusalem to celebrate and worship for the Lord. So they took advantage of others' worship through an obsessive amount, an enormous rate. We're not to gain benefit on others by taking advantage. This is profiteering. That's what that is. So that is not where our gains are to be. Well, that is our lesson on finances. It's also my last equipping hour, because next week Clay will be here teaching on Proverbs, and I will be preaching on friendship and faithfulness to the Lord. So it's been a pleasure being in this equipping hour class, one of my favorite things to do. I hope this was helpful for you, and I hope that you can take this lesson on finances and use it. I'll put the tables on our slides or on our website. I've been putting a note thing there and putting all the tables and charts together on one paper so you can have one-pagers, and also the slides up on the website as well. But let me go ahead and pray for us. Dear Lord, Heavenly Father, I thank you for the ability to work and the ability to use our wealth for your glory. Lord, if we think about it honestly, we live in an incredibly wealthy area. And much of the wealth that I know of the people in church that I've worked with, has been through hard work. I pray that you give those whom you've entrusted wealth to be honoring to you, to bless the church and your kingdom with it, and to show the character of righteousness behind it for the next generation. That it not be what we trust in, but that we always trust in the name of the Lord, not in our own personal security. And Lord, for those who are lazy, who struggle with possessions and being able to provide I pray that they turn their heart around to be convicted and to work hard for their needs, and that you would continue them in their situation until they work harder. Lord, the ultimate goal, whether we are wealthy or whether we are impoverished, is to work hard to be righteous and to honor you. We pray that as a church, we do that the rest of our lives. In your name, amen.